Chapter 1: The Humiliation. At the banquet table. The freezing drizzle of late winter London poured down upon the muddy, grimy alleys of the East End slums. The heavy grey fog from the River Thames mingled with the thick coal smoke from factory chimneys, creating a stifling atmosphere that chilled to the bone. In the corner of an old, damp silk dyeing workshop, the pungent scent of madder root, the deep indigo of indigo powder, and the warm golden hue of yellow chrysanthemums emanated from large wooden vats filled with steaming dye water. Adelaide Penrose stood with her head bowed by the rough oak table, her slender yet incredibly dexterous hands, though heavily wrapped in coarse light brown cowhide gloves, were meticulously detangling the deep indigo silk threads just retrieved from the warm vat. Under the faint, flickering light of a half-empty kerosene lamp, she focused her entire mind on every smooth thread, separating them to prepare for tensioning on the upright loom behind her. The steady dripping of water from the leaky tiled roof on the porch and the rustling of silk skeins rubbing against each other created a quiet rhythm, completely isolating Adelaide from the chaotic world outside, where the clattering of carriage wheels on the cobblestone street and the shouts of dockworkers echoed incessantly. Every movement Adelaide made bore the high precision of a skilled artisan and the extraordinary patience inherited from her late father. She always kept her workspace absolutely tidy, even though this dyeing workshop was incredibly impoverished and located in the most wretched area of London. Her father, Mr. Arthur Penrose, was once an illustrious silk dyeing and royal tapestry restoration artisan, a man who had dedicated his entire life to seeking the most perfect color formulas from natural botanicals to weave decorative tapestries for the estates of the aristocracy. But disaster had struck her family when her father was baselessly accused by a competitor of intentionally sabotaging and tearing the ancient royal phoenix tapestry during restoration. He passed away in poverty and disgrace in exile, leaving Adelaide and her little sister Mabel orphaned and penniless in a cold, prejudiced London. The high society of Mayfair immediately boycotted and shunned them, stripping them of all inheritance rights to the family's large weaving workshop in the city centre. With all properties confiscated, Adelaide was left with only this damp dyeing workshop and the wooden chest containing her father's color formulas as her sole lifeline to feed herself and her sister. Mabel Penrose, a 12-year-old girl with cheeks flushed from the winter cold, sat on a low wooden stool by a small fireplace with only a few fading embers left. Mabel was attentively sketching phoenix feather motifs onto an old piece of parchment, her wide eyes occasionally looking up at her older sister with deep concern. The workshop was too cold, and the north wind howling through the gaps in the rotting wooden door made both sisters shiver violently from time to time. Adelaide lifted her head, offering a warm, gentle smile to reassure her sister. "Just endure it a little longer. Mabel, I have finished dyeing this last batch of indigo silk. Tomorrow, when the solicitor collects this small tapestry and pays our wages, we will have enough money to buy a large bag of coal and a hot pot of potato soup for dinner. I promise our room will be warmer tonight." She gently stroked Mabel's messy hair. Her steady, soothing voice always possessed the power to calm the little girl's fears in these bleak winter days. But that promise of peace was extinguished before it could be fulfilled, when the wooden door of the workshop was violently pushed open, slamming against the stone wall with a loud crash that echoed through the space. Lord George Danvers stepped inside, followed by two burly servants cloaked in thick black wool. George was a young aristocrat, but his face was deeply etched with arrogance, greed, and cruelty. He was the cadet branch cousin of the Duke of Alderworth, a man who constantly sought every means to usurp the management of the estate and the resource-rich lands of the St. Clare family. George walked with heavy, haughty steps, the soles of his polished leather shoes striking the damp floor as an assertion of his absolute power over the two vulnerable girls. He cast his eyes around the impoverished dyeing workshop with utmost disdain, before stopping at the vividly colored silk skeins hanging on the wooden racks. Approaching Adelaide's work table without a single word of greeting, George used his silver-tipped walking stick to violently sweep the indigo silk skeins on the shelf, sending them crashing into a filthy mud puddle on the floor with a wet thud that shattered the rhythmic silence of the room. Mabel let out a soft scream and ran to cling tightly to Adelaide's waist. Adelaide immediately stood in front of her little sister, her slender back standing arrow-straight, her eyes cold and unflinching as she stared directly at George without a shred of fear or surrender. George sneered mockingly, pointing his walking stick at her face. Adelaide Penrose, daughter of the traitor. I came here to inform you that I have purchased all the debt papers of this workshop and the lease from the former landlord. From today, the rent will triple. Either you hand over 50 gold sovereigns immediately, or I shall throw both of you out onto the filthy docks this very night. Adelaide clenched her fists beneath her frayed gray cotton apron, trying to preserve the last dignity of the Penrose lineage. She did not beg. On the contrary, her voice remained incredibly composed yet sharp. Lord Danvers, my lease still has 3 months remaining, and the rent amount was clearly agreed upon in writing with the former landlord's signature. You possess no legal right to unilaterally increase the rent and evict us without a court ruling. My father has passed away, but the laws of this country still protect honest citizens from those who use their power to plunder the weak. George's face flushed with anger at the poor girl's stubbornness and resilience. He let out a coarse laugh and scoffed. The law? There is no law to protect the daughter of a traitor and starving, penniless children. If you have no gold, I shall personally confiscate the valuables in here. With that, George strode toward the wooden cabinet behind her and roughly snatched the small 5-color silk phoenix tapestry that her father had embroidered for her before his exile. This was the sole and most precious keepsake remaining of her family. The tapestry bore exquisite embroidery depicting a brilliant phoenix spreading its wings amidst blue clouds, a priceless masterpiece of perfect natural dyeing art. Adelaide lunged forward to retrieve it. Do not touch that. It is my father's only keepsake. But George's servants immediately blocked her path, shoving her hard onto the cold stone floor of the workshop. Mabel sobbed, running over to help her sister up. George held the vibrant tapestry in his hand, smiling triumphantly. This tapestry shall offset a portion of your rent debt. I give you until the end of this week to pay the remaining gold. Otherwise, you shall bear the consequences. He turned and walked away with his subordinates, their mocking laughter gradually drowning in the freezing rain outside. Adelaide knelt on the cold stone floor, her shoulders trembling slightly with anger and helplessness, but she quickly bit her lip tightly to stop the tears from falling in front of her little sister. She stood up, brushed off the dirt clinging to her old dress, tightly hugged the sobbing Mabel, and whispered, "Do not cry, Mabel, my beloved sister. We still have Father's formula chest, we still have our minds, and we still have these hands. As long as we do not give up, no cruel man can defeat us. I will find a way to reclaim Father's tapestry and protect you." She stared out the empty doorway where George Danvers had just departed, her gaze cold and resolute as steel. She knew that the battle to protect their honor and their lives had only just begun, and she would never bow her head to this bitter fate. Chapter 2. The Grey Contract. The dark black carriage bearing the Fire Falcon crest of the saint. Clare family slowly rolled through the muddy and gloomy streets of the East End docks. Inside the luxurious yet cold carriage, Theodore St. Clare, the Duke of Alderworth, leaned back against the gray leather upholstery. His face was deep and sharp, as if carved from ancient granite, his ash-gray eyes staring intently out the glass window. To Theodore, the world outside held no vibrant colors. The brutal war on the Iberian Peninsula and a horrific cannon gunpowder explosion years ago had severely damaged his optic nerves, permanently robbing him of the ability to perceive color. Since that day, the young Duke's world consisted only of dull grays, blacks, and whites, like an old monochromatic oil painting. The winter sky of London was a gloomy gray. The old brick buildings were covered in ash-gray coal soot, and even the coats and dresses of the passers-by were merely dreary shades of gray. Theodore despised the noise and chaos of this massive city, where piercing sounds constantly bombarded his ears, and he always yearned to return to the solitude of Alderworth Manor in the wild north, where he had intentionally decorated every room in minimalist tones to soothe his damaged vision. The carriage suddenly stopped beside a small alley leading to Adelaide's silk dyeing workshop. The sounds of quarreling and smashing from George Danvers echoed from the alley, disrupting the silence within the carriage. Theodore frowned, gently opening the carriage door. He stepped down onto the street, his tall, commanding stature immediately drawing the attention of several poor residents nearby. Draped in a thick dark gray wool coat, and wearing his familiar black leather gloves to avoid contact with the filth of the outside world, Theodore took slow but powerful steps into the damp alley. He disliked interfering in the affairs of others, especially in this wretched East End, but the threatening voice of George Danvers, his greedy cousin, who constantly plotted to seize his estate, had piqued his curiosity. As Theodore stepped over the rotting wooden threshold of the dyeing workshop, he witnessed the scene of George Danvers holding the brilliant phoenix tapestry, which, in Theodore's eyes, was merely a gray tapestry embroidered with exquisite bird motifs in contrasting shades of gray, and Adelaide standing proudly to face him. The contrast between the slender figure of the poor girl and her resilience, her back standing arrow straight before two burly servants, made Theodore pause. His sharp gray eyes quickly recognized the silver ring engraved with the Penrose rose on her index finger, the crest of the illustrious Penrose lineage, the only silk dyeing and tapestry artisans capable of restoring the ancient phoenix tapestry of the Saint Clare ancestors. That ancient phoenix tapestry was the very key containing the coordinates of the crucial North Meadows land boundaries that Theodore was fighting to protect from Danvers' prying eyes. Theodore took a step forward, the heavy thud of his leather shoes striking the damp stone floor, cutting off Danvers' threats. A terrifying silence spread through the small room as Theodore stood tall amidst the dyeing workshop. The mocking laughter of the two servants ceased, and they timidly stepped back. George Danvers started and turned around, his triumphant face instantly morphing into astonishment and fear upon seeing the Duke of Alderworth. "Theodore, why are you here in this filthy slum?" Theodore did not answer his question. His cold gray eyes stared directly at the embroidered tapestry in Danvers' hand, his voice low but carrying an overwhelming authority. "Put that tapestry down, George. The honor of the St. Clare family does not permit a member to rob a poor girl of her keepsake to settle a debt." Danvers paled. His hands shook as he placed the tapestry down on the wooden table, yet he still tried to salvage his dignity with a sarcastic tone, deliberately bringing up Adelaide's pain. "I am merely collecting the lawful rent debt of this traitor's daughter. Her father, Arthur Penrose, was convicted of selling royal tapestry secrets and lens blueprints to the French enemy. All of London despises their reputation. Your Grace need not pity this lowly sort." Hearing those insults, Adelaide stepped forward, her voice ringing out steely and cold, blocking him. "My father was no traitor. That accusation was a blatant fabrication forged by enemies to steal our royal weaving workshop. Justice may be obscured in the dark, but the honor of the Penrose family has never been lost on a single thread." Theodore looked at Adelaide, observing her hands, the crevices of her fingers lightly stained with pale indigo, yet impeccably clean and carrying the faint scent of madder root. This girl's unyielding pride was entirely distinct from the Mayfair ladies, who always tried to approach him with sweet lies. Theodore turned coldly to his solicitor, Fairfax, who had just stepped in behind him. "Fairfax, settle the entirety of this workshop's rent debt to the new landlord, and terminate George Danvers' current land lease for this area." George could only stammer in deep dissatisfaction, but dared not defy the Duke's command. Turning back to Adelaide, Theodore stood at a polite distance of 6 feet, his voice calm. "Miss Penrose, the St. Clare family is in need of a true silk dyeing and royal tapestry restoration artisan to repair the ancient phoenix tapestry of Alderworth Manor. I propose a formal contract. I shall pay you 500 gold sovereigns and protect your family from all harassment. In return, you must complete this tapestry before the spring of next year at my estate. Do you agree to come with me?" Adelaide looked at Theodore, recognizing the coldness and majesty of this deeply wounded duke, yet sensing the underlying respect for her father's talent. She dipped into a polite curtsy, clutching her little sister Mabel's hand tightly. "I agree, Your Grace. The honor of the Penrose family shall be restored upon your loom." Theodore nodded, signaling his servants to carry the small wooden chest containing her dyeing tools onto the luxurious carriage. Little Mabel let out a soft cheer as she stepped into the warm, agarwood-scented cabin, for the first time, while Adelaide sat opposite the Duke, silently vowing to dedicate all her talent to fulfilling this contract, leaving George Danvers standing trembling in fury and helplessness on the edge of the dark alley. Chapter 3. The Colourless Estate. The journey from glamorous London up north to the wild Yorkshire lasted 3 days and nights in the sturdy carriage of the St. Clare family. The further they traveled from the capital, the more desolate and freezing the landscape became, with gray stone valleys shrouded in fog and pristine moors covered in a thin, stark white layer of snow. Little Mabel had fallen asleep from exhaustion, her head resting on her sister's shoulder, while Adelaide remained awake, her eyes never leaving the rolling Rocky Mountains outside the window. She could feel a distinct change in the air. It became crisp, bone-chilling, and carried the breath of the wild great forest. The Duke of Alderworth sat silently in the opposite corner, hardly speaking a word throughout the long journey. His presence was like a silent stone statue that radiated an invisible pressure, daring anyone from initiating a casual conversation. As the carriage passed through the grand iron gates carved with fire falcons and entered the grounds of Alderworth Manor, Adelaide could not help but be astounded by the colossal scale of the estate. The castle was built entirely of dark gray stone, standing majestically atop a windswept hill, surrounded by ancient, leafless oak trees reaching their skeletal branches into the gloomy gray winter sky. The castle boasted a deeply ancient Gothic architecture, imposing yet exuding a chillingly eerie and solitary aura. Stepping through the massive oak doors into the main hall, the bizarre decor of the manor truly shocked Adelaide and Mabel. The entire floor was paved with intertwining white and black marble, creating a flawless chessboard. The thick woolen carpets running along the corridors all bore deep indigo, navy blue, and cold gray tones. The velvet curtains cascading beside the large windows were exclusively dark blue or ash gray. Upon the cold gray stone walls hung no paintings with warm red hues, only landscapes of the deep blue ocean, stone carvings or pencil sketch portraits. This place was entirely devoid of the presence of red or crimson roses in porcelain vases, creating a sterile, silent, and gloomy space. Mabel gently squeezed Adelaide's hand, whispering in fear, "Adelaide, why are there no red colors or fresh flowers here? It feels like a freezing world submerged beneath a blue ocean." Adelaide softly rubbed her sister's shoulder to comfort her, but in her heart, she was beginning to understand the reason. This Duke of Alderworth suffered from severe erythrophobia caused by the ghosts of war, and he had entirely eradicated the color red from his living space to prevent sudden psychological traumas that could ravage his mind. Butler Barnaby, an elderly man with a strict demeanor dressed in an elegant black suit, bowed respectfully to welcome them and led Adelaide up to the Duke's study to establish the rules of the manor. Theodore St. Clair was sitting behind a massive, polished black ebony desk in his expansive study. Light from the large windows streamed in, highlighting the sharp contours of his exhausted yet cold face. Theodore spoke in a low voice, his ash-gray eyes looking straight at Adelaide, maintaining a strict 6-foot distance between them. "Miss Penrose, I welcome you and your sister to Alderworth Manor. But before you commence your restoration work, we must agree upon several strict rules in this estate to ensure everything operates in proper order." Theodore stood up, slowly approaching the window, his black leather gloves lightly clasped behind his back. "Rule number 1. Your workspace will be strictly confined within the Grand Gallery in the West Wing, where the ancient Phoenix tapestry is hung. I have prepared a temporary dyeing workshop right next to the gallery for you, complete with all dyeing tools and an upright loom. Rule number 2. You are absolutely forbidden from bringing any vats of red dye, red pigment, or red thread out of the dyeing area, and no shade of red is allowed to appear before me. I demand absolute cleanliness and the eradication of red in the main house. Rule number 3. You and your sister are not permitted to wander into my private quarters in the East Wing without direct permission from myself or Butler Barnaby. And finally, unless it pertains to the tapestry's restoration progress or an emergency, you need not see me." Adelaide stood straight, listening to Theodore's every word with intense focus. She did not feel insulted by those cold rules. On the contrary, she recognized this as the necessary defense of a man who had suffered immense trauma and lived in solitude for far too long. She looked directly into his eyes, her voice clear yet resolute. "I understand and completely agree to your rules. Your Grace, I am a dyer, and I understand the value of cleanliness and order. My father once taught me that a single filthy flaw could ruin the entire color of the most precious piece of silk. I shall ensure all dyeing and weaving work remains confined to the West Wing, without disrupting the silence and order of this castle." Theodore looked at her, a flash of surprise crossing his cold gray eyes upon seeing her receive his demanding requirements with such calm professionalism. He gave a slight nod. "Very well, Butler Barnaby shall lead you to the Grand Gallery to inspect the condition of the Phoenix tapestry. Mr. Fairfax will prepare the documents for signature tomorrow. You may begin your work whenever you are ready." Adelaide dipped into a curtsy before Theodore, then turned and walked out of the study with the butler. Walking down the cold gray corridor, she silently pondered the ancient Phoenix tapestry, the brilliant soul of rebirth from the ashes, and the Duke living in his self-imposed obsession with avoiding red. She knew her mission was not merely to restore a precious embroidered tapestry, but also to soothe his battlefield wounds and bring true warmth to Theodore's freezing soul. Chapter 4. The Dance of the Threads. The Grand Gallery in the west wing of Alderworth Manor was a vast space, its ceiling soaring with black oak beams and large glass windows overlooking the windswept valley. On the central wall of the gallery, the ancient phoenix tapestry of the St. Clair family was solemnly displayed. The tapestry was colossal, standing over 10 feet tall, depicting a proud phoenix being reborn from fiery ashes, spreading its wings into the deep blue sky. But over a century, the tapestry had suffered severe damage. Time and dampness had rotted many large embroidered patches. The original silk threads were snapped, and most of the colored threads on the tail and wings had faded or torn, leaving only barren, frayed gaps. Adelaide stood before the ancient tapestry, gently touching her white linen-gloved fingers to the rotting threads, feeling the whispers of history and the exquisite craftsmanship of the artisans who came before. She quickly set to work, erecting a sturdy mahogany upright loom right in front of the ancient tapestry and establishing a temporary dyeing workshop in the adjacent side room. The once freezing side room was now warmed by the rosy flames from a large copper stove, where Adelaide boiled pure water to prepare the herbal dye pigments. She opened her father's wooden chest, taking out pouches of deep red madder root powder, dry cakes of deep indigo and golden yellow dried chrysanthemums. To dye silk threads with colors that perfectly matched the ancient tapestry, Adelaide had to precisely measure the ratios of pigment and natural mordants like alum down to the smallest grain. Little Mabel helped her sister comb the raw silk skeins, spinning them into threads as fine and soft as silk before dipping them into the steaming, fragrant dye vats. The sweet scent of madder root mingled with the sharp tang of indigo leaves and herbal pine gradually wafted through the grand gallery, replacing the cold, sterile smell of vinegar and cleaning wax from before. In the first few weeks, Theodore St. Clair frequently appeared at the grand gallery. He never stepped close, but always stood far away at the threshold, or maintained a strict distance of at least 10 feet, silently observing Adelaide at work. The steady, rhythmic clacking of the wooden weaving shuttles, rubbing against each other, and the sound of her pulling the threads taut created a soothing melody, shattering the castle's freezing silence. Theodore stood as silently as a shadow in his dark coat, his ash-gray eyes observing the swift, graceful movements of Adelaide's hands. He could clearly see the brilliant indigo she dyed, but whenever Adelaide reached for the ruby-red threads to embroider the phoenix wings, Theodore would flinch slightly, his chest tightening, and he would hastily look away to avoid triggering a latent panic attack. Yet her resilience and the rhythmic weaving of her dexterous hands held a strange magnetism, making it impossible for him not to watch. Adelaide's resilient and quiet presence was like a warm stream flowing into this frozen castle. Late one afternoon, as the pale gray sunset slanted through the glass panes, Adelaide was weaving an incredibly complex motif on the phoenix's tail. This was the transition between the deep indigo silk threads and the ruby-red silk threads to create a brilliant gradient effect. To weave this section, she had to press hard on the wooden pedal with her foot to lift the warp threads, while simultaneously passing the wooden shuttle, carrying the weft thread through the gap. But due to working continuously for many hours, her shoulders ached and her foot slipped from the wooden pedal. The heavy iron crossbeam of the loom suddenly lost its support and crashed down, pulling the entire warp thread system taut. If this iron beam hit the ground, all the thousands of fine silk threads tensioned on the loom would snap, destroying a month's worth of labor and further tearing the ancient tapestry behind it. In that hair-raising moment, Adelaide did not think of her own safety. She used both hands to desperately grip the falling iron beam. But the sheer weight of the beam caused her linen-wrapped hands to suffer severe friction and burning pain. Just as she thought she had to let go, a tall, dark shadow rushed forward. Theodore St. Clair completely disregarded distance or the rules of proximity. He stepped up and fully embraced the loom from behind her. His large, powerful hands, encased in black leather gloves, pressed firmly over Adelaide's trembling hands on the iron beam, using his entire weight and muscular strength to haul the iron beam back up to its safety latch. The iron beam stopped with a dry clack, the entire silk thread system saved in the nick of time. Both Adelaide and Theodore were panting. The distance between them was now closer than ever, with almost no gap. Theodore stood pressed closely behind her, his warm breath fanning lightly against her ear. Through the cowhide gloves and the thin linen, Theodore could distinctly feel the delicate shape of her fingers and the warmth of her flesh transmitting through. His ash-gray eyes widened, cold sweat beading on his forehead, his chest heaving violently from the sudden lunge and the abrupt panic of close physical contact. But instead of feeling nauseous, suffocated, or wanting to push her away as he had during previous forced encounters, Theodore felt a strange sense of peace. The pure indigo herbal scent and the gentle pine aroma on Adelaide's hands acted as a sturdy psychological anchor, extinguishing the flames of panic in his mind. He realized that touching her did not bring filth, but brought warmth and a vibrant rhythm to his long silent heart. Theodore slowly released his grip, stepping back to the familiar 6-foot distance, his leather-gloved hands clenching tightly to conceal the tremor within him. He adjusted his coat collar, his voice low and slightly hoarse but regaining its usual coldness. "Miss Penrose, you were too reckless. This loom can be rebuilt, but your hands cannot. Never overwork yourself to the point of such distraction again." Adelaide turned around, looking at the Duke who was trying to mask his confusion behind a stern facade. She offered a gentle smile, pulling at her torn linen glove. "Thank you for saving the tapestry and saving me. Your Grace. I knew you would not let everything be destroyed." Theodore said nothing more. He turned and walked swiftly out of the gallery, but his black leather hands still lingered, with the warmth from Adelaide's hands, a warmth he knew he would never be able to forget. Chapter 5. The light in the study inside the grand drawing room of Alderworth Manor, a quiet evening reception, suddenly descended into chaos due to a minor accident. A young servant, while carrying a silver tray, slipped, sending the crystal decanter filled with deep red wine crashing onto the white marble floor. The crisp sound of shattering crystal mingled with the soft gasps of the guests. But the most horrifying sight was the deep blood-red wine slowly seeping across the pristine white stone and soaking into a snow-white napkin. That harsh, glaring red hue instantly caught Theodore Saint. Claire's eye, the sharp sound of shattering, combined with the deep red stain, immediately triggered the horrific ghost of Waterloo in his soul. Theodore's chest tightened, his breath locked, his ash-gray eyes widening in sheer panic as the hallucination of the bloody battlefield returned, where he lay helpless beneath the corpses of his comrades. Theodore staggered backward, his face drained of every drop of blood. He leaned against a stone pillar, his entire body trembling violently as he plunged deep into the panic of erythrophobia. Adelaide, who was carrying a spool of indigo thread across the side corridor at the time, heard the crash and the commotion. Seeing Theodore standing on the precipice of a psychological breakdown, she did not hesitate. Adelaide immediately rushed before him, using her body to shield his line of sight from the red puddle on the floor. She quickly draped her deep indigo woolen shawl over his shoulders, gently grasped Theodore's freezing hands, and pulled him away from the crowd, guiding him back to his isolated study in the East Wing. To soothe his ravaged nerves, she hurriedly boiled water and brewed a special herbal tea, a combination of dried chamomile, pure mint leaves, and a hint of sweet orange peel. This was the herbal remedy her father used to cure headaches and soothe the nerves. Adelaide carried the warm, fragrant cup of tea into Theodore's dark study. The room was plunged into gloomy darkness to avoid all visual stimulation. Theodore sat with his head bowed on the black ebony chair, his shoulders trembling violently. Adelaide walked incredibly softly to avoid startling him. She placed the hot, soothingly fragrant tea on the wooden desks, then slowly approached, sitting at a safe distance of 5 feet from him. Her voice rose soft and rhythmic, like the sound of a silk-weaving shuttle in the quiet night. "Your Grace, you are in your study at Alderworth Manor. That nightmare has passed. There are no red colors around you, only the scent of herbs and silence. Focus on my voice and breathe very slowly." Theodore heard her voice. It was like a slender yet sturdy thread pulling him out of the battlefield's ruins. He lifted his head, his face pale. His black leather gloves had been removed, revealing long, slender, bare hands that were trembling uncontrollably. To help him distract his focus from the bloody memory of red, Adelaide began using vivid and emotional imagery to describe the colors of the world to him, redefining the color red and bringing him soothing hues. She spoke softly, her eyes looking directly at him with profound tenderness. "Theodore, I know the color red to you is a symbol of death and battlefield ghosts, but please listen to me. Red is truly not just blood and tears. It is the warmth radiating from the deep pink brick fireplace in the middle of this freezing winter night to save travelers from the biting cold. It is the sweet taste of a ripe cherry you can taste on the tip of your tongue, and it is the warm pulse of hot blood flowing in our veins to keep us alive. And blue, it is the deep silence of the vast ocean when you look down from a windswept cliff, the cool caress of a spring breeze against your skin after freezing winter days, and the absolute peace of the sky at dusk, when the first stars begin to twinkle. And yellow too, Theodore. Yellow is not just the brilliant sunlight. It is the color of wild chrysanthemums blooming on the hillside, signifying hope and a new beginning, and the gentle candlelight guiding a traveler home in the dark. Adelaide's vibrant and poetic voice was like a broom sweeping away the gray shadows in Theodore's mind. Each of her words painted a brilliantly colored picture in his monochromatic world, warming his freezing soul. Theodore listened, his breathing slowing, his chest no longer heaving violently, and his bare hands gradually ceasing their tremors. He looked at Adelaide. Under the faint light of the steaming hot tea, her face appeared with a pure beauty. Her bare hands, she had removed her linen gloves to carry the tea, resting open on her lap. In an unconscious moment seeking an anchor, Theodore reached out his bare hand and lightly touched Adelaide's fingers. When their flesh made direct contact, a warm electric current immediately ran down Theodore's spine. There was no panic, no sense of red obsession or suffocation, only the absolute warmth, smoothness, and cleanliness of the dire girl's skin, fragrant with herbs. Adelaide did not flinch away. A faint rosy flush spread across her cheeks as she allowed his fingers to gently intertwine with hers, sharing her warmth to soothe him. Theodore closed his eyes, feeling their heartbeats synchronizing to a single rhythm. When the panic had completely receded, Theodore gently lifted the warm cup of tea, taking small sips, the warmth of the herbal tea spreading to soothe the headache he had suffered for so long. The red outside might still make him tremble, but Theodore knew his soul was now sheltered by the warmest colors of love and trust for the girl sitting beside him. He looked at her, his ash-gray eyes filled with an unprecedented peace, and spoke softly. "Thank you, Adelaide. You are the only one who has helped me find peace against the ghost of red." Chapter 6. The Forged Letter and the Enemy's Return. In the days following the storm, the atmosphere at the ancient Alderworth Manor seemed to have lost some of its freezing, gloomy edge thanks to the gentle presence of the Penrose sisters. However, that brief peace was immediately shattered when Lord George Danvers returned to the estate, under the guise of inspecting the family's accounting ledgers, before the property appraisal of the Board of Trustees took place. His appearance was like a dark, ominous cloud hovering around the castle. Danvers was actually plotting to collude with industrial capitalists to sell off the resource-rich North Meadows land, right after usurping the inheritance rights from Theodore. He knew Theodore suffered from severe erythrophobia, the obsessive fear of the color red, and was trying to find a way to trigger his panic, to prove the Duke was insane and legally incapacitated before the Estate Review Board. Taking advantage of Adelaide leading little Mabel to the herbal garden behind the hill to harvest wild madder roots and spruce bark as materials for dyeing silk threads, Danvers stealthily broke into the side room of the Grand Gallery, where she placed her work table and her late father's formula chests. With a sly smile on his lips, Danvers pulled out an exquisitely forged letter, perfectly mimicking the sharp, decisive handwriting of Theodore St. Clare addressed to the family solicitor, Mr. Fairfax. He deliberately left the letter open on Adelaide's pile of tapestry documents, in the most prominent position, to ensure she would see it the moment she returned. The content of the letter was a fatal blow to the poor girl's newly blossoming trust. Fairfax, the daughter of the Penrose house, is merely a useful tool to serve the interests of the St. Clare family. Her skill in dyeing threads and restoring tapestries is necessary to restore the ancient Phoenix tapestry and help us precisely pinpoint the coordinates of the silver mines and land boundaries in the North Meadows. Once the tapestry is complete and our land ownership firmly established, I shall immediately cast both sisters out to avoid nuisance. The Mayfair aristocracy never has a place for the bloodline of a traitor like Arthur Penrose. I will ensure she is returned to her proper place in the filthy East End. When Adelaide returned to the weaving workshop, she saw the strange letter on the table. She curiously picked it up to read, and every line felt like a cold dagger piercing through her heart. Her linen-wrapped hands trembled violently, her face instantly draining of every drop of blood. Adelaide staggered backward, having to lean against the wooden loom to keep from collapsing. The trust, the warm descriptions of colors by candlelight, and the incredibly warm bare touch of Theodore in the stormy night turned out to be merely a perfectly staged charade to exploit her talent and loyalty. The agonizing pain from her late father's past betrayal rushed back, suffocating her reason. She recalled the day her father was escorted away by guards, their home confiscated, and the upper classes shunning. She had once believed Theodore Saint Clare was a different kind of man, a man whose dignity rose above the scheming for fame and wealth of the aristocracy. But now she realized that, in the eyes of that noble duke, she was still just the daughter of a criminal, a convenient pawn to be used at will and then ruthlessly discarded. She tried to hide the letter, patted Mabel's shoulder, and advised her sister not to worry, trying to keep her voice as calm as possible to protect her from fear. That evening, as Theodore St. Clair customarily entered the Grand Gallery to observe the tapestry's progress, he brought along a box of premium silk threads he had specially ordered his subordinates to purchase from London to assist her. He had intended to open up and share more about his fear of red and the trust he placed in her. However, Theodore immediately noticed a terrifying change in Adelaide. She stood behind the loom, her eyes devoid of the warmth or tenderness of the previous night, replaced by an absolute cold, distant, and defensive demeanor. She clenched her white linen gloves, rejecting every gaze from him and communicating only with brief, purely social responses. Her sudden coldness was like a vertical wall of ice erected before Theodore, leaving him feeling profoundly disappointed, hurt, and bewildered. The wounded pride of the Duke immediately shut his soul away. Before Theodore could ask for the reason, Adelaide proactively stepped forward, bowed coldly, and spoke in a steady, professional yet infinitely distant voice. Your Grace, to accelerate the restoration of the Phoenix tapestry and ensure the highest concentration without being disturbed by any elements, I propose to relocate my entire loom and dyeing tools, along with my sister Mabel, to the isolated weaving cottage at the northern edge of the estate's forest, near the North Meadows area. That cottage is quiet and highly suitable for weaving work. I will work there until the tapestry is completely finished. Theodore was stunned by her sudden request. His ash-gray eyes narrowed, an underlying fury rising within his heart as he thought she was intentionally avoiding him, rejecting the protection and close proximity the two had just painstakingly achieved. The cold and proud defensive instinct of the Duke immediately flared. He hid his leather-gloved hands behind his back, his voice as cold as winter ice. If Miss Penrose believes that leaving this main castle is the best way to fulfill her contractual obligations, then I shall not stop you. Butler Barnaby will help you move your belongings tomorrow. But remember this, you must finish the tapestry before the appraisal of the Board of Trustees. I will not accept any delay for personal reasons. Adelaide merely gave a slight bow, offering no explanation or complaint. I clearly understand my obligations, Your Grace. She turned her back, resuming weaving the freezing indigo threads, leaving Theodore standing solitary under the pale moonlight of the Grand Gallery. Theodore turned and walked swiftly away, his heavy footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. The profound misunderstanding was like an abyss, dividing two souls that had just found harmony, dragging both back into their own lonely and melancholic darkness. Chapter 7. The nexus of the storm. The isolated weaving cottage stood bare on the edge of the forest, north of the estate, bordering the pristine lands of the North Meadows. This was once the dwelling of the castle's old weavers. The house was built of rough, ancient gray stone slabs and had been abandoned for many years. When Adelaide and Mabel moved in, the weaving cottage had only a small stone fireplace and a few rudimentary wooden furnishings. Adelaide quickly re-erected the upright loom by the window to utilize the faint winter sunlight. Although the space here was incredibly cramped, freezing, and lacked all necessities compared to the vast main castle, Adelaide still felt relieved, because she thought she had escaped the sweet lies of Theodore Saint Clair. She poured all her strength and devotion into weaving the final phoenix tail feathers, suppressing the deep agony and profound disappointment in her heart. Mabel whispered in her ear, occasionally looking at the cracks on the gloomy gray stone walls. But the harsh nature of the north dealt a severe blow to the two sisters when a terrifying and ferocious blizzard suddenly swept down upon Yorkshire. This storm was far more destructive than the previous one, with gusts of wind so strong they seemed to want to lift the roof off the old weaving cottage. Thick snow fell, quickly blanketing the entire hilly region and blocking the path back to the main castle. In the middle of the night, a large branch of an ancient oak tree, weighed down by snow, snapped and crashed heavily onto the tiled roof of the weaving cottage. A corner of the roof collapsed, creating a large gap that allowed the gale and freezing snowflakes to rush into the weaving room, directly threatening the safety of the phoenix tapestry being completed on the upright loom. The moisture and biting cold from the blizzard could shrink, rot, and completely destroy the soft silk threads currently tensioned on the loom. In their panic, Adelaide and Mabel did not think of warming themselves. The two sisters stripped off their only thick wool coats and used their thin blankets to cover and shield the tapestry and loom from the falling snow. The weaving room became as freezing as an ice cellar. Little Mabel was so cold her teeth chattered, her entire body trembling violently, her face drained of a single drop of blood. Adelaide hugged her sister tightly, trying to use the meager warmth of her body to shelter the little girl beside the upright loom swaying in the gale, her heart clenching at the thought of their uncertain future. At the main castle, Alderworth Manor, Theodore stood restless as he watched the blizzard grow more ferocious outside the window. Thinking of the old weaving cottage at the northern edge of the forest and Adelaide's safety, his heart tightened with worry. His chest throbbed with a sharp pain, an overwhelming fear of losing what was most precious flooding his mind. Ignoring Butler Barnaby's dissuasion, and the severe headaches caused by the howling storm triggering his sensitive optic nerves, Theodore immediately grabbed his thick black wool coat and a hurricane lamp, plunging alone directly into the blinding blizzard outside. The snowy wind whipped his face, the freezing cold chilling his lungs to the core, his steps occasionally slipping in the deep snow, but his will to protect Adelaide and her sister gave him the strength to overcome the long, desolate journey. When Theodore pounded the door and entered the weaving cottage, he witnessed a scene that froze him in his tracks. A corner of the roof had collapsed, snow covered the floor, and the two Adelaide sisters were hugging each other, trembling beside the loom, tightly wrapped in blankets and clothes. Theodore immediately sprang into action. He rushed forward, using his broad, sturdy shoulders to temporarily brace the shifting wooden beam on the roof to prevent it from collapsing further. He tore off his thick, warm wool coat and draped it completely over the loom to protect the masterpiece, simultaneously pushing Adelaide and her sister close into the corner of the small fireplace, where he quickly lit a fire with the dry firewood he had brought. The physical contact and the forced close proximity in the cramped weaving room helped warm the two sisters. Theodore sat flat on the dirt floor close beside Adelaide, the warmth from the fireplace and his body radiated to soothe her freezing chill. As Adelaide searched her bag for a box of wax candles for light, George Danvers' forged letter accidentally slipped out onto the dirt floor. Theodore saw the parchment bearing his forged signature. He picked it up to read, and his ash-gray eyes immediately flared with the flames of utter fury. Theodore turned to look at Adelaide, realizing that her agony and defensiveness over these past few days stemmed from this despicable forged letter. Theodore clenched the parchment tightly in his bare hand, his voice deep, trembling with emotion but full of resolve, as he looked straight into her eyes. Adelaide, this letter is a despicable forgery by George Danvers. He wanted to destroy the trust between us, to force you to leave the castle so he could easily steal the North Meadows land, and prove I am incapable of managing the estate. I swear upon the honor of the St. Clair family and the soul of my late mother, I have never viewed you as a tool or despised the honor of the Penrose house. You are not a tool, Adelaide. You are the only one who brings warmth and color to my gray life. Do not leave me. Adelaide looked deep into Theodore's ash-gray eyes. She saw the sincerity, the pain, and his profound affection clearly written in every feature of his face, devoid of any pretense or deceit. All misunderstandings and resentments that had lingered for so long vanished completely like snow meeting the sunlight. Adelaide smiled softly, hot tears rolling down her cheeks. She placed her warm hand upon Theodore's bare hands, nodding gently. I believe you, Theodore. We will protect this tapestry and this estate together. Theodore squeezed her hand tightly. The soothing indigo scent mingled with the warmth of the fireplace flames to dispel the freezing darkness. In the freezing blizzard night by the wild forest's edge, two hearts drew closer together, warming each other amidst a lonely world full of conspiracies, opening a new chapter filled with warm light. Chapter 8. The disappearance of the ancient tapestry. After the blizzard passed, the isolated weaving cottage was quickly repaired by the castle's subordinates, but Theodore decided to bring Adelaide and Mabel back to live in the west wing of the main castle to ensure their absolute safety under his protection. The ancient Phoenix tapestry had finally been flawlessly restored by Adelaide after so many days and nights of arduous labor at the loom. It was an unprecedented masterpiece of weaving and embroidery. The reborn phoenix appeared brilliantly, with wings embroidered in resplendent ruby-red silk and a deep indigo tail transitioning smoothly in color. Specifically, at the borders of the tapestry, Adelaide had cleverly restored the positioning knots and special-colored threads, which were exactly the North Meadows land boundary coordinates hidden by Theodore's grandfather and her father years ago. The tapestry was hung solemnly once more in the Grand Gallery exhibition room, securely locked by 2 sturdy brass padlocks. Theodore stood before the tapestry. Although his eyes could only perceive contrasting shades of gray, he still felt the mathematical perfection in every needle and thread of hers. Little Mabel stood beside him, her face beaming with pride upon seeing her sister's work perfectly completed. However, on the night before the delegation of representatives from the Estate Board of Trustees, in their luxurious royal carriages, and the examiners from the Royal Scientific Institution arrived at the castle to conduct the boundary and will appraisal, disaster struck again. Early the next morning, Butler Barnaby rushed frantically into the study to report that the padlocks of the Grand Gallery had been violently smashed. When Theodore and Adelaide rushed there, the central wall of the exhibition room was left with only a barren, empty space. The fully restored ancient Phoenix tapestry had completely vanished without a trace. This news quickly spread throughout the estate, causing an underlying panic among the servants, and whispering gossip began to surface. Before Theodore could investigate, Lord George Danvers immediately appeared alongside several respected elders of the St. Clair family, led by Elder Silas Croft. The villain feigned profound astonishment and outrage, but his eyes could not conceal a gleam of ultimate triumph. Danvers pointed his finger at Adelaide's face, loudly accusing her before everyone. "My respected elders, the matter is all too clear. The daughter of the traitor Arthur Penrose has stolen our priceless family heirloom tapestry. She colluded with the illegal dyers at the East End docks to smuggle the tapestry onto the black market, seeking revenge for her father's exile years ago. I demand the immediate arrest of Adelaide Penrose, and that she be handed over to the local court for trial." The elders of the St. Clair family, who had always harbored heavy prejudices about Adelaide's origins, immediately murmured their agreement. Elder Silas spoke up sharply, demanding Theodore expel her and hand her over to the Mayfair police at once to avoid sullying the St. Clair family's reputation before the Board of Trustees delegation. Adelaide stood silently beside the empty loom. Her face was calm, her back arrow straight, and her eyes looked coldly at Danvers, without a single word of justification or panic. She knew that any words she spoke now would be useless against the prejudices deeply ingrained in their minds, and she placed absolute trust in the man standing before her. Theodore St. Clair stood tall amidst the grand room, his towering figure exuding a suffocating pressure. The Duke's prolonged silence caused the surrounding crowd to gradually quiet down. No one dared to raise their voice indiscriminately anymore. Theodore clenched his black leather gloves behind his back. His ice-cold ash-gray eyes swept across George Danvers' face, making the cousin involuntarily shudder. Theodore spoke in a low voice but carrying absolute authority. "No one is permitted to touch Miss Penrose in this castle without my consent. George, your evidence is nothing but baseless speculation. To facilitate the investigation and ensure the appraisal proceeds on schedule, Miss Penrose will be temporarily confined to the west tower of the castle under the supervision of my trusted subordinates. Mr. Fairfax and I shall search for the tapestry." After dispersing the crowd, Theodore personally ascended the spiral stone steps of the west tower to meet Adelaide. The howling wind outside continued to blow through the stone crevices. His heavy footsteps echoed in the narrow space. Stepping into the tower room, though small, it had been cleaned and warmed by him with a large, roaring fireplace. He found Adelaide calmly sitting by the window ledge, watching the falling snow. Theodore walked in, removing his black leather gloves and grasping Adelaide's soft hands, his voice full of warmth and trust. "Adelaide, I know you did not do this. This is Danvers' trap to push you away and present his forged tapestry to claim the rights to divide the North Meadows land at the inauguration dinner. He stealthily stole the real tapestry, but he does not know that Fairfax and I have prepared a plan to give him a taste of his own medicine. I want you to stay here temporarily to ensure your safety. Tonight, At the evening gala welcoming the Board of Trustees, we will unmask him before all of high society." Adelaide smiled gently. She took from her cloth bag a bottle of distilled vinegar and a small beeswax candle. She looked deep into Theodore's ash-gray eyes, feeling his unconditional protection and profound affection for her. She gave a soft nod, explaining, "I trust you, Theodore. George Danvers' fake tapestry might fool the naked eye, but it cannot bypass the laws of Penrose's natural dyeing chemistry. My father's dyed threads utilize a special silver mordant. When meeting candlelight, they will reflect and sparkle like morning dew, while the fake tapestry uses cheap chemical threads that will remain dull. Furthermore, the organic vinegar solution will immediately fade the new industrial aniline dyes that Danvers swapped in, and the true boundary map of the North Meadows is actually woven hidden beneath the color gradient of the phoenix feathers." Theodore offered a slight smile, a rare warm smile that dispelled the coldness on his face. He knew that tonight's battle would decide the future of them both, and he would use all the power of the Duke to protect his only artisan. Chapter 9. The public color test. The drawing room of Alderworth Manor tonight was submerged in an incredibly solemn and tense atmosphere. There was no boisterous Senate delegation from the capital. The appraisal was narrowed down to the family's privileged council board. Sitting around the large mahogany table were the estate trustees led by Mr. Fairfax, the Royal Textile Examiner Sir Colin Higgins wearing majestic gold-rimmed glasses, and the local magistrate Squire Thornton representing Yorkshire law. Lord George Danvers dressed exquisitely, his face clearly etched with ultimate arrogance and triumph. He stepped confidently to the center podium, signaling the servants to bring out a phoenix tapestry that he claimed to have recovered from Adelaide's accomplices at the East End docks. He stretched the tapestry upon the stand for everyone to admire. The trustees and Sir Colin Higgins approached to compare the tapestry with the ancient land deed documents of the St. Clair family. The embroidered phoenix motifs on the tapestry looked exactly like the original, and the boundary positioning knots embroidered on this tapestry indicated that the resource-rich North Meadows silver mine lands belonged to the cadet branch of George Danvers. Furthermore, to push Theodore into a corner, Danvers ordered the servants to rip off the fabric covering the fake tapestry, exposing a massive patch of overwhelmingly harsh aniline red embroidery covering the phoenix wings. Danvers laughed loudly with arrogance, turning to corner Theodore. "My esteemed examiners, the evidence is all too clear. This restored phoenix tapestry has proven land ownership belongs to me. Moreover, Duke Theodore St. Clair suffers from severe erythrophobia caused by war trauma, completely loses control of his actions before the color red, and is plunging into insane madness, as you can see. Such a cripple cannot manage Alderworth. I demand the trustees and Magistrate Thornton sign the document transferring the ownership of the North Meadows land and hand over the estate management to me immediately." Upon seeing the glaring red color revealed, Theodore immediately felt a freezing chill run down his spine, his chest tightening as the hallucination of Waterloo's smoke and fire flared in his mind. However, he looked toward Mr. Fairfax and recalled Adelaide's soothing, warm descriptions of the color red from the stormy night. Her words were like a mental shield, protecting him against the fear. Theodore took a deep breath, clenching his fists beneath the leather gloves to suppress the psychological tremor, his face retaining its cold stillness like a frozen lake. He did not collapse to Danvers' despicable expectations. As Magistrate Squire Thornton prepared to sign the transfer document, Theodore spoke in a steady, deep voice, signaling Mr. Fairfax, "Fairfax, bring our chief artisan in here to conduct the final color appraisal." The large oak doors opened, and Adelaide Penrose walked in with calm steps, her head held high in pride. She wore a simple yet impeccably clean gray cotton dress, her slender hands protected by pure white linen gloves. The appearance of the poor dyer girl with such a dignified demeanor caused all the guests and Sir Colin Higgins to murmur in attention. George Danvers laughed mockingly, loudly insulting her. "You still dare to show your face here, daughter of a traitor. Do you wish to deny your crime of stealing the family heirloom before these honorable examiners?" Adelaide stopped before the appraisal podium, her clear and steely voice echoing throughout the vast room. "Magistrate Thornton, Sir Higgins, and honorable trustees. The tapestry that Lord George Danvers is displaying before you is an utter forgery. I shall prove it immediately with 4 undeniable chemical and physical dyeing pieces of evidence. For the first piece of evidence, Adelaide took out a bottle of distilled vinegar and lightly brushed it over the ruby-red silk threads on Danvers' tapestry. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the brilliant red threads began to mottle, slightly bubble, and fade into dull ashen-gray stains. She explained, "The traditional Penrose dyes from natural madder roots are entirely resistant to mild acids. Meanwhile, this fake tapestry uses a new industrial aniline chemical dye. This dye is instantly decomposed and faded by organic vinegar." For the second piece of evidence, Adelaide turned her gaze to Sir Colin Higgins, requesting him to use a handheld microscope to examine the indigo shades on the tapestry. She said, "The indigo on this fake tapestry is a flat, industrial Prussian blue without any gradient shades. In contrast, the indigo following the secret Penrose formula is double fermented with sea salt, possessing a distinctive deep violet undertone hidden beneath the silk fibers when illuminated. Sir Higgins, you can easily spot the complete deviation from the Penrose formula on Danvers' tapestry." Sir Higgins leaned over to look through the magnifying glass, nodding continuously. "Exactly, the violet undertone of natural indigo is completely missing. This is a flat industrial color." For the third piece of evidence, Adelaide asked the subordinates to dim the oil lamps in the room, leaving only the light from a small beeswax candle. She brought the candle close to Danvers' fake tapestry. The chemical threads completely absorbed the light, becoming dull and dark. Then Theodore signaled the servants to bring out the true phoenix tapestry that Mr. Fairfax had just recovered from a hidden trunk in Danvers' carriage. When Adelaide brought the candle close to the real tapestry, the silk threads immediately reflected and sparkled like morning dew under the brilliant candlelight. Adelaide smiled. "The true threads were mordanted by my father using a special silver mordant, granting them the ability to catch the light and reflect a metallic sparkle like early morning dew, something Danvers' chemical threads completely reject." For the fourth and supreme piece of evidence, Adelaide moved the warm beeswax candle along the phoenix feathers, woven with silver mordant threads on the real tapestry. Under the heat and gentle light of the candle, the light-catching silver threads slowly revealed the hidden boundary lines and coordinates of the North Meadows, linking perfectly with ancient positioning constellations. Adelaide declared the true boundary map of the St. Clair family was woven directly into the color gradient of the phoenix feathers by my father using silver mordant threads. On Danvers' fake tapestry, he could only crudely embroider the lines over the surface to deceive you. This hidden map is unique and impossible to copy. The local magistrate, Squire Thornton, immediately stood up, slamming his hand on the table, and ordered the local soldiers. "George Danvers, your plot of fraud and theft of property has been entirely unmasked by artisan Penrose. Arrest him at once." George Danvers' face turned as ashen as dust. He collapsed trembling onto the floor, the sound of iron chains clanking dryly as the soldiers escorted him away in ultimate disgrace. The estate trustees bowed and signed to confirm the permanent ownership of the North Meadows land belonged to Theodore St. Clair. Theodore St. Clair slowly stood up from the presiding chair, walking with majestic steps toward Adelaide, standing proudly in the center of the drawing room. Before the witnesses of the trustees and Magistrate Thornton, Theodore removed his duke's black wool coat, gently draping it over Adelaide's slender shoulders, standing close beside her and declaring in a deep, powerful voice, "The colors on this tapestry may be forged, but the honor of the St. Clair lineage and the dignity of Adelaide Penrose are not. From today, she needs not explain her standing to anyone, for her name is Alderworth, and she is my one and only Duchess." Chapter 10. The Colors of the Heart. After the dramatic and turbulent events of winter, the ancient Alderworth Manor slowly transitioned into the warm weather of spring. The thick layers of snow and freezing ice on the desolate hills of Yorkshire gradually melted away, giving way to sprawling expanses of lush green grass and the brilliant blooming of pure white snowdrops and warm yellow chrysanthemums. The flawlessly restored ancient phoenix tapestry now hung solemnly in the main hall of the castle, resplendent in color beneath the warm spring sunlight. Under the strong financial support and guidance of Theodore St. Clair, the family's assets were restructured to invest in natural art silk weaving and dyeing workshops. Furthermore, Theodore St. Clair also donated substantial funds to the art academies in London, supporting the restoration of national historic tapestries and creating employment and educational opportunities for generations of poor dyeing artisans from the slums, so they would not have to endure the agony that Adelaide once bore. The honor of her late father, Arthur Penrose, was completely restored before the royal family and the Royal Scientific Institution Committee. A bronze statue depicting Arthur Penrose holding a spool of silk thread and a branch of dyeing herbs was solemnly inaugurated at the entrance of the new royal dyeing workshop named Penrose and Sisters. The Mayfair high society that had once shunned and humiliated the two sisters now constantly sent countless calling cards and gala invitations, hoping to catch the attention of the future Lady of Alderworth. A small, simple, and incredibly cozy wedding was held in the private chapel of Alderworth Manor, far away from the noise, gossip, and rumor columns of London society. Only a few closest friends were invited, including Butler Barnaby, Solicitor Fairfax, and little sister Mabel, who wore a truly adorable pale blue silk dress, personally dyed by Adelaide herself. The chapel was decorated simply yet elegantly with fresh white roses and lush green ivy branches. The gentle morning sunlight shining through the large glass windows created sparkling streaks of light upon the stone altar. There were no extravagant banquets, no boisterous crowds, only the sacred, peaceful atmosphere of a truly healing sanctuary. Theodore St. Clair stood by the stone altar, dressed in an exquisitely tailored black duke's formal suit. His face was calm, but his sharp ash-gray eyes gleamed with overwhelming warmth and anticipation as he watched the chapel's wooden doors slowly open. Adelaide Penrose stepped into the sanctuary, guided by Mabel. She wore a wedding dress of smooth cream silk, her hair neatly braided and adorned with small white roses, and an exquisitely carved antique silver hair comb. Her mother's keepsake, her slender hands still wrapped in clean white linen gloves. As she approached the altar, she looked up at Theodore, offering him a gentle smile that completely melted away the remaining gray shadows in his mind. As the priest began to read the sacred vows, a profound silence enveloped the small chapel. Theodore looked at the woman standing before him, realizing that his affection for her had transcended all limits of past wounds and psychological traumas. Adelaide was not a tool. She was a peaceful haven, the only one who brought vibrant colors and a warm rhythm to his dark, monochromatic life. He did not want a cold property agreement or arranged marriage contract. He wanted to share his entire life, heart, and soul with her. To truly cross the boundary of his psychological trauma, he decided to make a decisive action. Before exchanging rings, Theodore paused for a beat. He looked straight into Adelaide's eyes, and to the utter astonishment of Butler Barnaby and Solicitor Fairfax, Theodore slowly removed his familiar black leather gloves, placing them upon the stone altar. He rejected the protection of the gloves and the safe distance, voluntarily offering his pale bare hands, trembling slightly with emotion out before Adelaide, ready to receive her warmth without any defense whatsoever. Adelaide smiled warmly, her eyes sparkling with tears of happiness. Without a second of hesitation, she too removed her white linen gloves, placing them beside Theodore's gloves on the stone altar. She gently placed her warm bare hand into his bare palm. When their flesh touched directly for the second time, a faint rosy flush spread across her cheeks, and a gentle wave of warmth instantly ran through Theodore's body. There was no panic, no feeling of filth or suffocation occurred. There was only the absolute warmth, smoothness, and cleanliness of the skin of the girl fragrant with indigo herbs. The heartbeats of the two slowly synchronized to a steady rhythm, like two silk threads being woven together on the loom of life. After the wedding ceremony, Theodore and Adelaide walked hand in hand, under the shade of the ancient oak tree in the castle's spring garden, where birds chirped to welcome the warm new spring, and the wind rustled through the flower beds. Theodore walked close beside her, their bare hands tightly intertwined without a gap, no longer needing the 6-foot distance rule. Theodore looked at the golden chrysanthemums, showing off their colors along the path, then turned to look at his beautiful wife, a radiant and unprecedentedly happy smile appearing on his face. He spoke in a deep, warm voice, overflowing with peace. "Red used to be a nightmare and darkness enveloping me, Adelaide. But when I saw that color on your fingers, it became nothing but the warmest and sweetest love to soothe my soul. You are the one who saved my life." Adelaide rested her head on his sturdy shoulder, whispering tenderly, "Our time has only just begun, Theodore." Under the brilliant spring sunlight of Yorkshire, two hearts merged into one warm beat, embarking upon a new journey full of light, faith, and eternal love.